Okay, thank you, everyone. It's nice to be back in person. This is our first talk in 3 years. It's economics and strategy talk, but we feature somebody from the accountancy department. So we need to do more of this, or this is a interdisciplinary interaction. And this is something that the Dean is encouraging us to do this, so happy to see everybody. We are delighted to have Kelly Pope, or Kelly Richmond Pope, from the accounting department. And I don't want to do a long-winded introduction here. She is a prominent scholar in the area of fraud and white-collar crime. And she will be, if you want the long version of the intro, you need to buy the book. You can look at the back flap here. Hope to see everybody also at the reception afterwards. There will be some book signing. So she will talk about, look at fraud in today's organizations. And she will take questions. Do you take questions as we go? Or?
Sure.
Yeah. And for the online people, you can use the chat.
Yeah.
Chat function.
Please try to stay muted.
Yeah. But, one more thank you to Rich. He did all the heavy lifting to organize the event, and he's both my right and my left hand, and the voice of the program. Okay. And we have Gabriel Bucci. Come on, too many introductions.
No, sorry.
But thank you everyone for being here. All yours, Kelly.
Thank you. Okay, this is I started my day talking about fool me once, and I'm ending my day talking about fool me once. So it seems like it's all that I talk about. So I'm so excited to be here with you, and we're gonna start. So no one has a book in here, so I'm gonna assume you haven't read anything. You have no idea what I'm about to start talking about, except you know it's about fraud. Yes? Has anybody ever been defrauded? It's okay. It's a safe space. Okay, thank you. No one in this whole room has ever been defrauded. The hands are, yeah, you have. Of course you have. Yeah. Online, has anybody ever been defrauded? Sure you have. I mean, come on. Well, hopefully, most of you haven't. But we're going to start by saying fraud does not happen in a vacuum, but it happens in a village. And we're going to talk about the village of fraud. And what the book talks about and why you're going to run and go read it, because it's going to just pique your interest. So we'll do a quick introduction. I'll tell you a little bit more about myself. And we're going to talk about a couple of case studies, and then we're going to wrap up. So how I like to describe myself is I'm a left-handed CPA. Anybody left-handed in the room? Let's see, it's always a small group. A left-handed CPA who uses filmmaking to teach life lessons about decision-making. So typically, when I am out and about, I have a film crew that follows me, not like a reality show, but I have a film crew that follows me when we do these on-camera interviews with white-collar felons, whistleblowers, and victims of fraud. So I collect all of these videos, and I use them in my classes, and I use them when I do training workshops. And so typically, there's an entourage that comes with me. But notice I don't say accounting professor. I just say a left-handed CPA, because I feel like I'm a different type of accountant. So probably you might not meet, you might not think we're fun. You might not think think we're boring, but we're not. Okay, so where did all this start? So this is the house I grew up in. This is in Durham, North Carolina. And I'm originally from Durham, North Carolina, so I might sound like a Southerner. And the house behind this house was another Tudor-style house. And this family lived there by the name of the Dorches. And so when you're younger, you notice things about people. And Mr. Dorch always drove the nicest car in the neighborhood. And so you'd see him riding around. I think when I was younger, he had an Audi. And it would seem that every 2 years, it was a different color. Sometimes it was white Audi, a black, red. And then one day, Mr. Dorch just disappeared. And I was wondering, I hadn't seen the car going around the neighborhood, but I would see his wife and I would see his son, JD, James Dorch Jr. But Mr. Dorch was gone. So me being the nosy teenager that I was, my parents were having coffee at breakfast, and I heard my dad say, well, today I'm going to Greensboro, to the federal courthouse, to listen in on Mr. Dorch's case. And so my ears were like, what in the world has Mr. Dorch done? Well, this was in the Durham Herald-Sun about Mr. Dorch. So I'm going to read to you. It says, former Nations Bank executive Thurman E. Dortch could face a prison sentence of more than 200 years on his conviction for defrauding the bank of more than $2 million. Now, this is in the 80s. It's still a lot of money, but this was in the 80s. Second paragraph says he could also be fined $1.7 million when he is sentenced in July on fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy convictions. But the last paragraph is really explaining his why. So according to prosecutors, Mr. Dortch schemed with Durham developer Gary Lynn Wallace to remove from Nation Bank's books a series of improper loans that Mr. Dortch had made to Mr. Wallace in the 1980s. So Mr. Dortch was trying to help a friend. Okay, that's really what it says to me. He was trying to help a friend. That really stuck with me. Now, this explains why Mr. Dortch had a new car every 2 years. I'm joking, we don't know that. But anyhow, he was trying to help a friend. So just remember this. Remember this story, we're gonna come back to it. So here's another story, my fraud stories. So this is Grandma Kelly. So I am named after my grandmother. So my mother's name was Carol Ann Kelly. So my name used to be Kelly Ann Richmond. So we just carry names and reuse them all the time. But if you look at this picture, can you tell what's in her background? Can anybody tell what this is? It's okay, you can say it. Yeah, liquor. Grandma Kelly owned a liquor store. And so that's all we knew growing up. And so now we would say my grandmother was an entrepreneur. We didn't say that back then. Grandma owned a liquor store. And so I grew up working in my grandmother's liquor store. I had no idea how inappropriate that probably was at 12. But like, that's what we did. So when we would go to Indianapolis, we would spend the summer in her liquor store. We would run the register. We would get things off the shelf for people. I mean, completely inappropriate, right? But we did. And so my grandmother had a liquor license, which if you know anything about how hard it is to get a liquor license in the state, my grandmother had a liquor license. So when my grandfather passed away, she ran the liquor store. So she ran it for about 22 years, but it never really was super successful because everybody she hired would steal from her. Not only that, when we would, so it's my cousin, it was 4 of us, so my brother, my other 2 cousins, we'd be in the liquor store and we'd say, Grandma, we want to get some ice cream. She's like, oh, go baby, go get some money out the register. That's just what you needed money. It was like her purse. The register was her purse. So she had no internal controls. And so when I think back of how fraud and risk has really circled my life, I think back to Mr. Dortch. I think back to my grandmother, because had she had better internal controls, maybe I would loan the liquor store now. Choice Brands would be like 3rd generation by now, right? But no, so those are the things that really tagged her business. Now, what we're going to talk about is fraud from the inside, because a lot of times when you are reading about fraud, you're reading about how fraud is people from the outside are coming into an organization. But we're going to talk about it a little differently. We're going to talk about the fraud that our colleagues may be involved in. So that might make some people feel a little uncomfortable. So this week alone, I've probably done 7 or 8 of these presentations, but the one that's on my mind is I did one with the SEC, the headquarter SEC office. And when I said that, I could just sense that they were just like, what is she about to say about us? They're talking about regulators involved in fraud. And I said, just stay with me, work with me, because employees do engage in fraud. And so the research shows that insider threats account for nearly 75% of security breach incidents. So the people that we work beside, the people that we live beside, the people that we worship with can engage in fraud. So just remember that. So a question that I had a while ago is this question of why is fraud so prevalent? And so these are the 2 reasons that I've come up with is employees rationalize fraud differently and we report fraud differently. We're going to do a little experiment in a second, but think about the simple model of rational crime. And when we decide if we're going to lie or cheat, there's 3 reasons that we typically go through in our mind. What's the benefit we're going to gain? What's the probability of getting caught? And what's the extent of expected punishment? Okay, think about that. So we're going to do a little experiment. All right, everybody has to participate. Everybody has to participate. So here's the scenario. You invite a friend who works in the same industry to lunch, and you spend 15 minutes talking about work-related items And an hour talking about personal items, and the fact that you're laughing says something to me. You submit the receipt to your company as a work-related lunch for reimbursement. You gotta keep a straight face. You gotta keep a straight face. All right, everybody understand the scenario?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. I know you understand the scenario because you're a big red. Okay. All right. The question is this a work-related lunch? Okay, now I'm gonna remind you, 15 minutes talking about work, an hour talking about personal, you submit this as a work reimbursement. Okay, that's the scenario. Question is this work-related? So take the poll. Show of hands, and online too, show of hands, yes. This is a work-related lunch and you are submitting this receipt all day. Okay, so most of us in online would
Yes.
Yes, okay, yes, this is work-related. Okay. Okay. Raise your hands or put in the chat, no way. This is not work-related. Just one, two. Hands high. You're proud of it. No, this is not work-related. Okay, 2 in the room. What are we doing? How many do we have? Okay. All right, so we can see, now typically, the room is a little split. Okay, typically it's split. It's split. Most people, it's about 50% that say yes, 50% that say no. And these are large audiences that I'm talking about because 900 people in a conference, in a convention hall. So half say yes, half say no. So I'm going to ask you a question. Those of you that said, yep, this is work related, I'm submitting that receipt. Tell me why. Why do you call this work related?
I mean, I guess the intent of what the meeting was about matters, right? 'Cause I mean,
Okay.
the time that you spent talking about work doesn't matter. If you went there with asking for a sale and you got the sale, then you can talk personal.
Okay, you can work personal for 5 hours. It doesn't matter. The intent was there. Okay. Yes.
So I work in marketing and business development, so I look at things through that lens.
Sure.
To me, it's about building relationships. And so
Relationships.
if it's a friend and yet it's still work related.
Still work.
I feel that it's definitely justified.
Okay. We have 2 notes. Why is this not work related?
I didn't actually work
Okay.
most of the time.
Most of the time was spent just conversing. Okay. What about you?
Yeah, if it's like during your workday and you're spending that much time out of your workday for it, then like it's time, I guess you could have like time away from work.
We can rationalize both, right? Now, the beauty of me being an academic and all of my friends being professionals is most of the items in the book are from either things that have happened in class or things that have happened in the lives of my wonderful, amazing, ethical working friends. And so when my phone rings and says, Kelly, I gotta ask you something. I'm like, go ahead. Well, this is what happened. So there's this person, we spent only 15 minutes talking about work-related items in an hour because it's networking, yes? And I said, okay, sounds like it's work-related, but tell me more. How many times have you gone out with this person? Why'd you have to ask me that? Okay, we've done this about 9 or 10 times. Okay, so maybe this isn't relationship building anymore. Maybe it's personal. So we can rationalize whatever it is we want. Okay, we can do that. So Fool Me Once is the book that is on Raphael's desk. And this was my pandemic project, if you will. And I have had a lot of thoughts in my mind for a while. And one of my friends said, why don't you just write a book? And my friends have been saying, do it for a while. And I was like, nah. But then when everybody had to stop, and you had to stop and think, I said, okay, maybe I'll get this done. So I got this done. And I'll tell you how the book is organized. And then we have a couple of activities we're going to play today. So the book is organized by, these are the chapters. It's broken up into 3 sections: perpetrators, prey, and whistleblowers. And so what I've noticed through the years, because as I told you, I go around the country and I do these on-camera interviews with white-collar felons, whistleblowers, and victims of fraud. And we're going to start with the perpetrator category. They come to class. That's okay. They zoom into class. We've taken field trips and we've visited people recently home from prison. I'll tell you, that's in the book. We took a field trip. We got on a plane, took about 20 students and visited this guy that just got out of prison. It was safe. We checked it all out. I mean, it was safe. But it was an amazing experience. And so what I've learned is all perpetrators are not the same. Our responses to them are very different, depending on where they fall. Now, who loves true crime? Anything. You love the podcast, you love the show, you just like, when it comes on, you're like, oh gosh, I can't wait. Anybody like that? Yes. Oh, none of you all like true crime. The other people that didn't raise your hand. You don't? Tell me more about that.
It's too closely, it's too possible.
It's scary. It's scary. That's a very good reason. Because it is too real, right? True. The true part is really true. All right. So intentional perpetrators are what the movies are made of. They're people that know the inside of your system. They know how to exploit that system for personal gain. So your Bernard Madoffs, your Enron execs, Ken Lay, they knew where the loopholes were and just exploited them. Most people don't identify as an intentional perpetrator, okay? Most people don't. I'm just gonna skip over to the next slide. Most people don't focus on enriching themselves, operate as if rules don't apply to them, and thrive in environments with lax internal controls. Most of us don't see ourselves as that. But many of us could see ourselves as this: an accidental perpetrator and a righteous perpetrator. And so when I have white collar offenders come into class and they fall into these categories, the responses from students are completely different, okay? The sentencing for them when they fall into these categories, a little bit more lenient. So accidental perpetrators happens by a mistake or oversight made by another person that opens the door for crime, okay? Let me give you an example. And this is, well, I'll wait, I won't give you that example yet. They tend not to speak up. These are the people pleasers. They tend not to speak up and tend to avoid confrontation. Now, safe space in this room. Anybody avoid confrontation? Yeah. For example, if I said, can I borrow your Netflix password? Do you mind?
I don't even have any.
Okay. Pretend that you did. I just need to log in. Can I just use your computer?
Yeah.
See? See? She'll let me do it. Now, what if I logged in using her login, and then I went to some inappropriate site, but it's her, not me. But she's not going to push back because maybe I'm a professor, she's a student, maybe? Okay, and she's like, this professor asked me to do something. What am I going to do? I'm not going to say no. So there's a little bit of, could be intimidation that's at play, and you often follow the other orders of a supervisor. You can then find yourself as an accidental perpetrator. When they come to class and they share their stories, my students' eyes are as big as silver dollars because they are terrified because they see themselves in those stories. That could be me 5-10 years from now, easily, okay? And so the students are talking about, well, that password example that you gave, that actually happened to me on my internship. My boss asked me to just log in using my password, and I knew it wasn't right. I said, did you say no? No. What could I say? They oversee me. But they knew it was wrong. Now, what if that led you into a situation where you became an accidental perpetrator? What are you going to do? So those stories are what's filling this chapter. People that have come to class, people that we have visited, people that have Zoomed in. And so you'll learn about the accidental perpetrators. And I promise you, when you read about them, you will empathize just a little bit different. You won't empathize here because you'll just say, good riddance. That's what they get. But this group, maybe not. Now, this last group, righteous perpetrators, this is sort of where Mr. Dortch fit in. Follows the Robin Hood syndrome. I'm going to take from the rich and give to the poor, okay? And they use the company resources to aid those outside the workplace. Mr. Dortch used his power and his privilege within the bank to help a friend, someone outside of the bank. So maybe the friend had a struggling startup, and didn't have the right income to qualify for the loan that he needed to help his business. So Mr. Dortch was able to just massage the paperwork to help him. Funny story, about 3 hours before I came in here today, I'm doing a project with a nonprofit organization called the Coalition for Insurance Fraud, Coalition Against Insurance Fraud. So I'm interviewing all of these people. Coalition Against Insurance Fraud, that's the name of it, not for. And I'm doing all these interviews with people that have committed insurance fraud. So today, there's a guy that I was talking to, his name is Matthew Cox. And he actually was inviting me on his podcast because he's a convicted felon and has this really popular podcast and he wanted to talk about fraud. But I ended up interviewing him because he was telling me how he committed this $40 million real estate fraud. I was like, wait a minute, are you serious? And he said, absolutely. I said, how did your fraud start? Well, what I knew is, one, I'm going to get a commission if I can close these loans. But I would have people, these home loans, and I would have people that would come in, and if their income level was $40,000 instead of, they were $35,000. If it was $40,000, I could help approve them. So I just used some whiteout to just give them what they needed to get the loan. Now, he started out as a righteous perpetrator trying to help people get homes. Now, it spiraled out of control, but at first, he was trying to help somebody. That was his initial reason. Now, this is a wild story, wild. I'll tell you about that maybe the next time we talk, but those are righteous perpetrators. This category is actually another inspiration. In the book, there's a story about a woman by the name of Kelly Richmond. And I talk to Kelly Richmond probably every other day, okay? Kelly Richmond is, she's originally from the Dominican Republic, and she is a graduate of Columbia University Law School. So she was a top lawyer, equity partner on Wall Street, multi-million-dollar earning professional, okay? And so Kayla had oversight in her company. Her company was hiring vendors because they had a lot of copying work for the litigation cases that they were working on. Any lawyers in the room? No? Okay. So Kayla was a super successful superstar in the law firm, but her husband wasn't, okay? Her husband wasn't. If there's anybody in a relationship, you can understand how that discrepancy can create tension in the home. So Kayla said, you know what? We are looking for vendors, and I'm going to go home and tell my husband if he sets up a copy business, I could hire him as a vendor. Okay? Seems wrong? I see your face. It seems wrong because there's a conflict of interest. But I'm going to ask you, have you ever referred someone to a job that you knew? Yeah, right? Okay, so, and there wasn't an anti-nepotism policy in the law firm. Okay, so remember that. So Kayla says to her husband, okay, if you set up this LLC, we'll hire you. Now, Kayla knew it wasn't right, but she didn't know how wrong it was, so she didn't tell her partners. So her partners then hired this vendor, which was her husband. And her husband is doing the work. I mean, and the invoices that, the type of work, millions, okay? It was very, very profitable. But one day, Kayla's husband stopped doing the work. Now, let me pause there. Let me pause there, because what was happening in Kayla's firm is Kayla's firm would, at the beginning of a year, they would say, you know, we need a certain amount in budget. And once they would get close to year end, if they didn't meet or use all the money in their budget, they were trying to figure out ways to use the money. You're shaking your head, because what happens if you don't use all the money in your budget? How does accounting feel when you come back and say, we actually have $5 million left over? I know we thought we would use it all, but we didn't. So we have this surplus. Is that good or bad? It's bad. It's bad. So what happened was Kayla's law firm said, the group decided, anybody that has any outstanding invoices, just submit them. Even if the work hasn't happened, just submit them, because the last thing we want to do is tell accounting we have a surplus. Does everybody understand? Okay? You understand? This is like the budget games that happen in organizations. So remember that. So what happened was Kayla started to put invoices in that her husband had not done the work for yet. But everybody did that. Okay? That was sort of the practice, because the last thing we want to do is tell accounting we have a surplus. So she's approving invoices knowing that he didn't do the work. But this is okay, right? Because everybody agreed to this. Wink, wink, everybody agreed that this is what we're gonna do. So now I'm gonna go back to her husband. He knew that she was submitting these invoices. He also knew he wasn't doing the work, okay? So Kayla says, I need you to do this work now. And he says, okay, yeah, right. He didn't do the work. So Kayla's in a tough place now. She didn't tell her partners that she hired her husband, and now her husband isn't doing the work. What does she do? What does she do? This is a decision point. What does Kayla do? Does she tell on herself or tell on her husband, which is still telling on herself? What does she do? Husband? Tell on her husband? Her husband?
Well, she should at least like confront him and.
Good. Okay. So what Kayla did exactly what you said. Kayla confronts her husband because Kayla says, the last thing my husband is going to do is defraud my company. I can fix this. I'm not going to let a fraud happen on my watch for my company that I'm an equity partner in. Of course not.
Right.
We get hired to fix things, right? So she approaches her husband and says, I need you to do this. My job is on the line. What is wrong with you? All right, well, fast forward a couple months. Kayla's on a plane. She gets off the plane, and her phone has all these messages. She's like, what in the world? Who is blowing up my phone? Her husband has been arrested. Now, what I failed to tell you was, when her husband was younger, he had a little drug charge on his background, and that's why it was difficult for him to get a job. It happens, right? It happens. Okay? He didn't have a lawyer that could just hide it away. Okay? So that was why it was hard for him to get a job. So Kayla sees this. She's like, oh my goodness, you were arrested. I know you were wrongfully accused. We're going to get the best legal team to help you because they can afford it. Okay. So Kayla is supporting her husband. Okay? Little did Kayla know, her husband had another family. Okay? So one of the reasons why he couldn't get that work done is because he had a whole nother family. He had her family and another family, and she didn't know this. Okay? This was, once he got arrested, all of this came out. Now, Kayla's mad. Poor Kayla. Empathy. You see how your heart is like, oh my goodness. She didn't have to do this, right? She didn't have to do this. So she finds this out. And as law enforcement is investigating this case and her husband, they start digging. And they notice he has a very successful coffee business that's earning millions. And there's this big time law partner that's associated with this man. I'm taking her down too. That's what happened. So Kayla, make a longer story short, Kayla's husband was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Kayla was sentenced to about 6.5. She was released early due to COVID, so under the compassionate release program. And so Kayla reaches out to me over Twitter and says, Kelly, I've been following you for a very long time, and I would really love to share my story with you. Would you be willing to talk to me? Now, you know, I'm like, absolutely. So we were teaching on Zoom at the time, and so Kayla said, I'm willing to share my story with your class, but I've never shared it before. So this is fresh. She still had her ankle bracelet on, okay? So my students, they come in, this is graduate class. Typically the cameras were off. All the cameras were on. All the cameras were on. When people were listening to Kayla's story, people started crying. They could see, they could empathize in a way that they were just like, oh my goodness. Now, I'm not saying Kayla didn't make any mistakes. I'm not saying that, because we do know it's righteous perpetrator. What I want us to realize is that's where we could fall, okay? We easily see ourselves there. Could we? Could we empathize? Yes? Yeah, we could. That's the righteous perpetrator. So,
Kelly, can I ask a question?
yep.
Have you noticed any difference in sentencing between how long that accidental or righteous
Yes.
fraud goes on versus
Sure.
the mea culpa kind of thing?
So I was just talking about this morning. I haven't done a study on it, but I would like to. I would love to test my model to see. Anecdotally, these sentences are longer. These sentences are shorter. People tend to support them. What was interesting about both accidental and righteous, law firms offering their legal services pro bono to help them. So people are acting according really to these categories. So anybody, any future PhD students out there or over online, we can do a study about this to compare people's sentencing that fall into these categories. Great future study. Okay, so that's the first 3 chapters in the book. There is a middle section about the prey, innocent bystanders, and organizational targets. We can read about that. We'll talk about that. But we're going to talk about the whistleblowers. We're going to do a little exercise. When I say whistleblower, you say what?
Money.
Okay, try it again. When I say whistleblower, what word comes to your mind?
Snitch.
Thank you. Snitch. When I say whistleblower, what's another word that comes to your mind?
Rat.
Rat. What else?
Righteous.
Righteous. Okay. Anything else?
Leaker.
Leaker? You said, okay, so most of us are saying very negative things about whistleblowers, yes? What I wanted to do was change the narrative a little bit because all whistleblowers aren't the same. Now, rat, snitch, tattletale traitor, yup, they're vigilantes. I'm a self-proclaimed vigilante whistleblower at this age. I don't have much to lose, I'm telling. You know, I'm telling, why not? I'm telling, if I see it, I'm telling. I'm the old lady in the window that sees the car speeding down and I'm calling 911. I got their license plate, they're speeding. There's kids playing outside. That's me now.
Or I'm writing a letter.
I'm writing a letter. That's right. Tat, 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 tat. I'm writing a letter. You're a vigilante whistleblower, I can tell. So vigilante whistleblowers often embody the negative characteristics of a whistleblower. They tend to be bullied, harassed, but they can handle it. They're actually ready for it. They're like, bring it on. You know, that's how they act. They're tough. They're ready for the war. They're visible and willing to bring to the attention of media and authorities, but they typically take a personal hit to fight for justice. But they're ready for it, okay? They are ready for it. They'll speak up and not worry. And so there's people that are in this category that are in the book that have visited class. And so the students don't really understand this because they're like, why? Like, why don't you just keep quiet? But they can't because they're vigilantes. We need the vigilantes around. We do. But the other 2 categories tend not to have the same experience as a vigilante whistleblower. And those are accidental whistleblowers and noble whistleblowers. So in accidental, they just stumble upon it. They're doing their job and they just notice something seems off and they report it. They weren't setting out to say, you seem suspicious. I'm going to start investigating you. That's not an accidental whistleblower. They're just tending to their own, mind their own business, and they walk by and they say, this looks weird. And then they report it. That's the accidental whistleblower. Noble whistleblowers, however, are a little bit different because they are internal employees approached to participate in an unethical plot, and they're not having it. They know what the rules are. They know that they are a part of a team, and they know the team is, let's say, they're supposed to be safety inspectors. And they know that team isn't doing their full job because if they were, they'd have to say, the lot of cars needs to be recalled and it's going to cost us $20 million. They don't want to be that person, so they don't do the safety protocols. But this one person knows that they're not doing what they're supposed to do, and they step outside of the group and say something. That's the noble whistleblower. So there's cases and stories in the book of each, all right? So where did all this come from for me?
Can I ask a quick question about whistleblowers?
Yeah.
So what fraction of whistleblowers do you think are people who were part of the scheme and feel guilty or feel that they're about to be caught? Where does that fall?
They're the crossover category. So you can have, so sometimes you have one of these that crosses over into this category. So I put all those in the crossover category. And I did that because, let me backtrack. A person that is involved in the scheme isn't a whistleblower. They are probably a righteous perpetrator, okay? Because if you're involved in the scheme, you can't be a whistleblower. If you've done something unethical, you don't get to hold the name whistleblower, in my opinion. And so the case that I start this chapter with is Edward Snowden. And if you think about Snowden, half the world believes he's a whistleblower, half the world thinks he's a perpetrator. He's a righteous perpetrator. He still broke the law, but he felt like he did it for a very good reason. So I would argue that you cannot have whistleblower if you've broken the law, if you were part of the scheme. Make sense?
And how common do you think is that?
So this is the thing. I don't have a stat for it because this is the archetype that I created for the book. So now it's time to test it. So maybe we'll do a study together. We'll figure all that out, okay? All right, so let me go back. So if you know anything about me, when I told you I'm probably the most unusual accounting professor, I did a documentary back in 2017. And I can promise you when I pass on my headstone, it's going to say wife, mother, friend, sister, and all the queen's horses. That's what it's going to say. Because when I tell you, if you ever have the opportunity to do a life-changing project, this is mine, okay? All the Queen's Horses came out in 2017. It screened on Netflix from 2018 to 2019, now lives on Amazon Prime. It's been to 14 film festivals all over the world. It's won, I think, 4 film festival awards. It was the #1 documentary on Amazon, iTunes, DirecTV, when it came out for 10 days. And this is with no marketing budget, none. Because I didn't have any money for that, you know? So who would have thought that an accounting professor could make a documentary? Funny story, if you ever look at there's a website called IMDb. It's a database where all of you read about movies. The trivia question is, did you know the director of All the Queen's Horses is an accounting professor at DePaul? Like, that's supposed to be funny. Because it's like so odd that someone with no film training could do something like that. But what I was interested in is this log line in the center. How could one woman steal $53 million without anyone noticing? So I'm going to show you the trailer to the documentary because this story is what flows throughout the entire book, okay? You watch the movie, read the book. There's tons in the book that's not in the movie. So I'm going to show you what it's about. It's just a minute.
She completely pulled the wool over her town's eyes.
Do you think you were just smarter than everybody else, Rita?
$53+ million is just unbelievable.
She lived quite a life, totally different life than what she portrayed here.
By day, she's wearing municipal clothes, and by night, she's dripping with jewels and furs.
World champion Rita Crundwell.
She had this grand, high-stakes horse empire.
My first thought was, Dixon has that much money? That you could embezzle that much money from a little tiny place like this?
People just trusted her so well, more than anything.
Rita, how did you go to bed and not think, whose lives I'm infecting here?
One of the things the FBI wanted to find out is, did she do this alone? Was she hiding from somebody else?
For 20 years, I worked side by side with this woman, and I never knew her. I never really knew her.
So a couple people online said they couldn't hear. So I can drop the trailer in the chat. There's tons of video in my presentation, but this audio is too terrible, so I can't do that to you. But All the Queen's Horses, what you just saw was an example of an intentional perpetrator. That's Rita Crundwell. The innocent bystanders were the residents of Dixon. They had no idea what was happening. They had no idea that this person in office stole all their tax dollars. And then the accidental whistleblower was Kathy Swanson. That's who you saw sharing her story of, I worked with her all this time and I didn't know what was going on. So why did I write the book during the pandemic is this how the story extends. So Rita Crundwell was sentenced to federal prison on Valentine's Day of 2013. And she was sentenced to 19 years and 7 months in federal prison. So Dixon recovered $40 million of the $53.7 million. We thought it was all over, okay? In 2020, 2020 COVID happened. And so Rita started Rita decided that she was going to write a letter to her judge, Judge Reinhardt, to say, COVID is happening. It would be safer for me if I was being considered to be released out of federal prison. I can go back to Dixon and live with my brother. She had to write this letter and ask for permission because at that time she had not served at least 50% of her sentence, and that was one of the criteria that had to be met at that time. Now, because I did the documentary and I know everything about this woman's life, when she wrote this letter, which is publicly available if you know how to search Pacer, I got a hold of her letter, the actual letter, so I wrote an article about it on my Forbes blog at the time. And so I like to say I'm the one that broke the story that all the news outlets then started talking about, but they didn't give me any praise for that. Okay, so many people were outraged that Rita was asking to be released early, she decided to take the request back. Fast forward to 2021, she had served 50% of her sentence. So I started getting texts and emails from people from Dixon saying, did you hear Rita Cromwell is coming home? I'm like, no, she's not. In the federal system, you have to serve at least 85% of the time. She can't get out early. She's sentenced to 19 years and 7 months. She can't get out early. Famous last words, she got out early. So when she got out early, people started writing to me and saying, Kelly, are you going to do another follow-up documentary? I'm like, absolutely, positively, no. Never again. Never again. But I had something to say. And so throughout the book is the other side of All the Queen's Horses story, what the innocent bystanders thought, what the organizational target, which is Dixon, how they missed the red flags. And then towards the end, the question of, was Rita over-sentenced or under-sentenced? Was justice served? You got to read the book to find that part out. So that's how the story continues throughout the entire book. We end at 7?
I'm sorry. Yeah, 7:30.
Okay. If the audio was working, I would show you this story, but the audio is not working, so I'm not going to show you this story. But I'll tell you what it's about. It's about this guy named Harry. This is a true story. And it's about a gentleman who embezzled $8 million from his employer. And this is a true story. And what happened is his daughter was riding her bike and got hurt. She flipped over her handlebars and damaged her face. And his insurance policy would not cover cosmetic surgery. Okay? So what he did is he embezzled money from his employer. He had access, he had pressure, and he did it. And so what that did is it opened the door for him to steal more money when life pressures came in. His mother-in-law died. His wife had a baby unexpectedly. He needed money. And so he ended up embezzling around $8 million. So he was an intentional perpetrator. A more work-related intentional perpetrator is what this gentleman is. So we're going to do an activity now. We're going to do an activity.
Can I ask you a quick question, Kelly? Sorry.
Yeah.
So is there, it seems like a lot of these stories and these cases that you've talked about are cases where something goes on for a long time and then something happens. Mm-hmm. Is there a pattern to that? I mean, why do they get caught? Is there any kind of...
So some of them are long, some of them are short. It's not a pattern really. I take that back. The pattern would be ignoring all the red flags that are just waving in front of everybody's faces. That would be the pattern. So that's why it's been going on and on for a long time. So think about Rita Cromwell. Rita Cromwell was a city comptroller. Dixon has a population of 16,000 people. They have an annual budget between $6 and $8 million, and she embezzles $53.7 million. She took all the money. She made it work. Like, she clearly was a good accountant, right? She just did bad things with what she knew how to do. But is it odd that Rita took 4 months off of vacation a year? That didn't seem odd to anybody, but it sounds odd, right? 4 months of unpaid vacation. Did it seem odd that a person that works for the city owned 400 plus horses? Does that seem odd? If I came in here and told you all I own 400 horses and I work at DePaul, would you think that's a little odd? Like you would think it, right? Like what in the Sam Hill? How does she own 400 horses on her professor's salary? Like you would think that's odd. And what she would say was, well, I have an investor in my ranch and I have dividends from stock that my family owns. Things that you couldn't prove. So the pattern is the red flags that people just continue to ignore. I'll give you another example. And this one is a case in the intentional perpetrator chapter in the book and the innocent bystander chapter in the book. And so it's the case of a man named Dr. Robert Courtney. Dr. Robert Courtney was a compound pharmacist, and he was based in Kansas City, Missouri. And what Dr. Courtney did is he diluted cancer patient drugs. So he ended up diluting around over 90,000 prescriptions. And the reason why he did that is he wanted to expand his profit margin. So think about it. If I just buy medicine and I'm going to use it on you, and I just give you a little bit and you a little bit, I can spread it over more people and I can make more money. And so Dr. Courtney had two pressures. He had an IRS bill of around $500,000, and he wanted to make a donation to his church of around $1 million. So he had pressure. Now, it's a very egregious fraud, but get this. If you are 72 years old and you have stage 4 breast cancer, the likelihood is you may pass away. And when you do, no one's going to question it. And that's how his fraud was able to go on. Now, there was a nurse who said, my cancer patients just aren't exhibiting the typical chemotherapy issues that most cancer patients have. What do we all assume? If you know anybody that's ever had cancer and they are undergoing chemo, what do we think they typically have? Nausea, hair loss, fatigue, pains. Now they did have pains, but pains because they didn't have any medication. But when she told the doctor, I don't understand why my patients, stage 4 cancer patients, don't have these signs. You know what she said? Everybody reacts differently. Now, most of us react the same. Stage 4 cancer with chemo, right? Most of us do. So what she did is she could not pay attention to those red flags any longer. She watched it go on for too long. She decided to take some of the medication, sent it to the FDA, and found out there was no medication in what he was issuing to the doctor to help those patients. So that's the story of Dr. Robert Courtney. Now, what's interesting is he's a terrible intentional perpetrator, okay? We interviewed victims of Dr. Courtney. So we interviewed the daughter of a mother who died because she did not get the proper treatment because Dr. Courtney diluted her drugs. And so she talks about how her mom had just an awful last couple of days of life because of what he did. So there were red flags, and this one nurse said, no more. This does not make sense. And so she was more of a noble whistleblower, a little vigilante, because she kept at it. So the first time she said something to her doctor, she's like, this isn't right. The doctor just pushed her aside. And when she took that medication and took it to the FDA, sent it to the FDA, that was her vigilante saying, like, something is wrong. So that's how the case was discovered from a whistleblower. So I think the pattern is not paying attention to the red flags. Okay, everybody take your phones out. People online, take your phone out too. We're gonna play a little activity right now. Now, I've talked to you about the categories of perpetrators, and I talked to you about the categories of whistleblowers. All right, so if you can point your camera here, and when you do, you should click on the page that comes up so you can get to what you see on the left-hand side, this image here. Everybody there? Oh, you see a black screen that's an arrow? Click on the arrow. It should say the Fool Me Once fraud experience. Is this box in your way? Can you get it?
Oh, I'll try that one.
just on?
No.
I got it.
Everybody got it? Yes, you got it. You have it?
Trouble, let me move that.
That's what I'll share with Brian. Can two people share?
Not really. You wouldn't want to. Well, again, if you want to, you can. Okay, does everybody have it open where you clicked on the arrow? Yes? Okay, so when you click on the arrow, you should then see this on the left-hand side. The fool me once, a fraud experience. Does everybody see that? Okay. Show of hands. Who wants to do the report fraud side that tells you what type of whistleblower would you ever be if you were to ever be a whistleblower? Okay, those of you want to do that? Okay, click on report fraud and just hold on a second. All right, party people. Those of you that picked the other side have picked the commit fraud side. Okay, you picked the commit fraud side. Click on that.
Click on whichever one you want.
Click on the one you want, and I'm going to give you instruction for each, okay? I'm going to start with my report fraud side. Okay, so my report fraud group, what you decide, you're going to see a scenario at the top, and it's going to say a choice. And you're going to have to choose, are you going to report it or are you going to move on? That's just for my report fraud group, okay? For my commit fraud group. You're like, you don't be stupid when you're at home. For my commit fraud side, what's going to happen? I meant to, do you see the question that says, what's your favorite color, and put a number in? Okay, just put a number in, put your favorite color. It's just identifying that I'm here today. I don't know who is who. Okay, I can't tell you, I can't say, Gabriella, I know which kind of perpetrator you're going to be. I can't do that. Okay, don't worry.
I'm a reporter anyway, so
okay. All right.
I'm a whistleblower.
So everybody's on their side. So for those that are committing fraud, what you're going to see, it says, you've approved loan documents. You have to, it's telling you an action. If you click on the A, it's going to give you a rationalization. If you click on a B, it's going to give you a rationalization. If you click on a C, it's going to give you a rationalization. Pick which one you agree with. At the end, it's going to tell you what type of perpetrator you would be if you were ever to be one. Hold on to your answer. We're going to discuss it. Okay, we're going to discuss it. I'll give you about 5 minutes to go through the game. It doesn't work?
No, I have the word sit in the house.
I tried to get it.
Can you just come up here and use this one? Use the computer screen. Yeah?
Oh, for the ABC, was there like what one meant? Sorry, I was.
Click A. Click A.
Click on it, it'll tell you what it is.
Did you get it? You still can't get it? Here, give me your phone. Let me see. Let's see. All right.
I'm getting full service here.
Your phone is so big. Let's see. I want yours open.
No?
Your phone is on something that's different.
That's because you've already.
Don't worry.
I don't know. I've never seen one.
I'm just gonna put too much light.
Do you want to do it on my phone? You have to. Hold on. I don't know why yours isn't.
Kill or be killed.
I can send you the
Do
link.
you need to be under the DePaul Wi-Fi?
Guys, you don't understand how many dick pics I get every single day.
Oh. Do you want me to send you the link? I can send it to you. I don't know why your phone isn't working.
You just use the camera and not the QR code.
I'm sorry.
I can send you the. You got it?
I'm using now. There you go.
Get it open. Okay.
Thank you.
Uh-huh. Never seen that.
If I were to lift up my fucking ball sack right now, there's nicotine patches on my fucking testicles. Literally.
Okay,
Oh.
this is like
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Don't come back. So it's like.
No.
And now people still did Zoom bombing.
That's what I just typed in. You saw that? Yeah.
I didn't know people still did that.
Apparently they do.
Right.
So it's just a series of binary choices or multiple choices, like you're given a scenario.
Are we done? Okay. Anybody willing to report out what type of whistleblower, we'll start there, what type of whistleblower did it say you were? Noble whistleblower, okay.
Accidental.
Accidental whistleblower. When you read the descriptions, did it feel as though that is who you are?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah?
It says it's a tie.
Between?
I don't know. It says based on your traits, you show all of them. Accidental.
Okay, so you have them all. Okay. So depending on the scenario, you'll show up differently. Okay? That's what it's telling you.
I don't know. That's what it said.
That's
But
what-
all of them, I would report every single one of them. But I also thought, like, there was one with the handbag. I would call, I would want to keep the handbag, but I would call to say you sent me both. I would get permission first and hopefully try to keep them, if they give me permission.
Okay, all right. And
I
they
would've just-
might, and they might.
And they
See,
might.
all of those are true stories. True stories. True stories. That handbag situation actually was my personal story. And not, it wasn't a Louis Vuitton bag, it was a different bag. But what was interesting is I ordered this bag, it came happy. The next day, another bag comes. I'm like, looking around, like, I have two of these bags now. What am I going to do? So immediately, my first reaction was, I'm going to send this bag back. That's my first reaction. That was my first reaction. It's seriously. But then I started talking to my wonderful, lovely, ethical corporate friends. And they said to me, Kelly, are you crazy? It's not your fault they sent the bag. Sell it. Pocket the money. Better yet, sell it and let's go out. Take me. And I said, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing it. A, it's wrong. B, let's play this out. What if I do that? I do that. sell the bag on eBay, get the money. We go out. 2-3 weeks later, the company calls and says, we're noticing that we sent you an extra bag. Could you please just send that bag back? So now I'm in the Kayla situation, right? Do I say, I sold the bag? Or do I say, I never got a bag? So let's say I said I never got a bag.
No, you give them your bag back, the other one, give them the other one.
Why would, so I have a question. Why would you post it on eBay?
Just
If you want to make money, like,
don't
make it. No, like, don't put it online.
Don't put it on. Okay, so she's giving me, she's giving me a strategy. You're my friend. You're my new girlfriend. Give me a strategy. Okay, so keep playing this out. So I tell the company, no, I didn't get a second bag. Well, we show proof of delivery. Actually, there's a picture showing that it's at your doorstep. So you're telling me this picture is not your house? Now I'm in the Kayla situation. You know, not necessarily. We're rationalizing, right? We're rationalizing. That would put me in this accidental perpetrator category. So that was a true story. And that is funny because that's the one that gets people. They're like, ooh, I'm going to keep the bag. Everyone says it. Every corporate audience says it. Every corporate audience. And I said, well, you know, that is how some of the people I've interviewed, how it started. I'm like, what are you trying to say? I'm just saying, you know, it starts small. It starts small. It's not the amount. It's the thought process. It's the decision. So if you give people things that have enough tension for them to really think through what's going on, you'll find some truth. You'll find some truth. Okay, my party people. Those that committed fraud. You know who you are. Are you willing to share? But before, I will tell you, everything I make, create, I always start at home. So when I was doing all the Queen's Horses, at the time, my kids were elementary and middle school age. So like 4th grade and middle school. So that must have been like 7th or 8th grade. And so when I finished the film, I showed it to them because I felt like if they could understand it and it could keep their attention, it'd keep everybody's attention, right? And so they were my guinea pigs. When I did this game, I let my husband do it first. So he's like, okay, Kelly, I'll do this game. Did the game. He's like, guess what, Kelly? It says I'm an intentional perpetrator. Is that good? No. I said, we need to talk. Because I will make a film about you. Should you? But so I'm saying all that to say that he was one. So are there any intentional perpetrators in this room? Yes, thank you for sharing. Now, were you surprised as you were going through the scenarios? Were you surprised from the findings?
I mean, maybe like a little bit. I think all of the ones that I chose that were technically righteous picks. You know, it was like if the people, like the small contractors are going to lose their job if you don't do this, and this is how they feed their families. So you have the choice to let all these people not feed their families or do this. I feel like that's where I was just like, yeah, that's really hard for me. And I think if I was going to commit fraud, that's the type of fraud that I would commit.
But it gave you intentional instead?
But it said that I was a tie between intentional and accidental.
Okay. Okay. So you thought you would be more right. Okay. All right.
But it wasn't, I mean, it is technically intentional because I knew that it was wrong.
Yeah. So when my husband went through it and his end answer was intentional, he said, the things that made me intentional, everybody does. I'm like, do they? Let's talk. He's like, yeah, like these aren't that big of a deal. This is sort of how it works in corporate. Kelly, you don't understand corporate because you teach. That's why you put it this way. I'm like, actually, we'll leave it there. We're keeping it safe. We're keeping a happy home. So we'll keep it there. But what I've been noticing, so once I get to about 10,000 responses, I'm going to write something about it. But what I'm noticing is most audiences, and I think I should be right around 6,000 responses right now. Most audiences are trending on accidental perpetrator and righteous perpetrator, which is actually good news because we can fix that. You know, with good training, with good internal controls, we can correct that. But if everybody was an intentional perpetrator, then I'm gonna have a lot of documentaries to make, okay? So what I wanted to do and why I created this is I wanted the book to have an active reading component. So like you're not just reading about people, because a lot of times we can be very judgmental. I'm like, Kayla did that, how dumb. Like I would never do that, really? You know, where do you fall? Like give you something to actually respond to. So that's why I came up with that. And I've been using it in a lot of the corporate audiences. And it's interesting to watch how people react. And so yeah, 10,000, I'll write something about it. But anybody else read a scenario and it just was like, yeah, this seems normal. Anything shocking? Yeah.
I was a reporter and it was the girl living out there for me. I was like, some people are just bad at money. So, like,
Oh, I say that again?
I was a reporter and there was a scenario where the lady was living out there for me. She just like had nice stuff, but you knew how much she made. Some people are just really bad at money. Like, maybe she's getting credit card debt.
Okay. All right.
Or maybe she's getting from someone else.
Yeah, I was like, none of my business.
None of your business?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
The same thing.
Any other scenarios? Now, again, all of these are real. All of them are based off of the true cases that are in the book, but I just wanted you to put yourself in the driver's seat so you can make a decision.
So Kelly, some of these, especially the schemes that ran for a long time, right? So they could start as being accidental or righteous, and you say, well, that wasn't a big deal, right? And then it's a slippery slope, right? So it could, from there you cross over into the intentional.
You know, I'm not a big fan any longer because I don't think the slope is that slippery. You know, and I'm gonna tell you what, this is Diane. And Diane always used to say, you know, it's a slippery slope between, you know, how it started. It was started off small. So let me tell you, I wish I could play this, but, you know, I'll just act it out for you. But Diane, her fraud started because she had a corporate profile and a professional profile with the travel agency that managed the travel for their small boutique HR company, okay? And she booked a trip and the person booking the trip accidentally put it on the corporate profile. And so she didn't notice it until after her trip. Okay, so everybody understand the scenario?
Yeah, that happens to me.
Happens to you.
Sometimes,
okay? Well, when it happened to her, she got back, she was like, oh my goodness, this trip has been, this shouldn't have happened. And then she just put it aside. One day turned into 2 days, turned into 2 weeks, turned into 3 months. And so what she started to realize during that time period was, I'm overworked and underpaid. I'm undervalued. My bonuses are smaller, so I'm just gonna take what's mine. Okay, so it started out small. And it started out as an accident made by another person. That little, let's say the trip was $1,000. Let's just sort of use that as a round number. This ended up rising to about $650,000 embezzlement from a small employer, from her employer. So Diane's slope, was it slippery? She knew that the mistake had been made, but she didn't catch it. Or she didn't change it when she should have. And then the rationalization of why this was okay, why this is mine, I should just take what's mine, started to enter into her psyche. So what she ended up doing, that little mistake, ended up opening the door of how she could rationalize other things. So her husband had an American Express. They had an American Express or corporate American Express card. So you know what she started to do? Slip his bill into the bills of all the American Express, the corporate American Express is being paid. Okay, no one caught it because it opened the door and showed her that no one is really paying attention to the internal controls that are in place. Then something else that she started to do, now this is a good one. At the time, she was working from home a lot. And so she had to purchase some new office equipment. And she was charged with, okay, Diane, we need you to purchase new computers, new furniture, and artwork for the office. And you know what she did? She did that. And then she said, well, I need a new computer. And my home office needs to look nice. I think I'll take that piece of artwork too. So she outfitted her home office too, because she justified by saying, I work from home too. I should have a high speed, a better computer, just like what's in the office. So she was starting to rationalize and justify. So is that slippery? That's a cliff. That's a cliff. But many of us, this is like the lunch story that we started with. We can rationalize why it might be okay to get that computer. Yes, just a little bit. I'm working from home. I need a home computer. I need a desktop. Better yet, I need an Apple. I don't want this Dell. I'm gonna get an Apple. This is my time to get that Apple. It's more expensive. And they didn't even catch it. So her employer didn't know. Diane was employee number 2. She even called the ADP and changed the amount that she was being paid. So she was employee number 2. She had so much access. So when you say slippery slope, I think about some of the actions. I think the slippery slope is probably more for the accidental perpetrators, probably more so than anybody. And I put accidental perp because her crime started out off as an accident from someone else, but she definitely went into the intentional perpetrator category. But Diane was one of the first interviews I ever did. And so sitting down with somebody, asking them to share the most embarrassing thing that ever happened with them in their lives takes some skill. Because you want them to feel comfortable, but you also want them to share. And so this interview lasted probably about 4 hours. And it wasn't until the 4th hour that I could shake her up and get that rehearsed voice out of her head. And I said, what did you do? Just tell me the crime, the scheme. Like, stop all this prepared notes. What did you do? She's like, okay, I'm just going to tell you because I'm tired of you asking me. And she just listed all the things that she did. So sitting down with perpetrators, it's tough. It's a voice that I've had to practice and learn. But your point about the slippery slope, I just don't know how slippery it is.
I guess my point is that something that starts an accident, well, can happen once, maybe twice, but it cannot happen like every period, right? So basically, I mean, you start as an accident and then you realize, well, that wasn't a big deal, right? And then that crosses over into the intentional if you keep on doing it, right?
Yeah, but I guess that first decision of what makes it not a big deal, I guess, is what we can discuss. Like, I was doing it. So the Coalition Against Insurance Fraud study I was telling you about, I did an interview on Monday with a woman that is currently in jail waiting to be processed to go to prison. And so the prosecutors were there, her attorney was there. We did it over Zoom. And this, I thought by now I knew how to do these interviews. This woman was tough. She was tough. And she was the kind of insurance fraud she committed. Clients would hire her to stage accidents in their home so then they could file the insurance claim. Okay, so, oh yeah, like that was her whole business. So say for instance, you had a leak in your kitchen and it didn't have, you just have a leak and it's not an insurance claim. It's not something that you can submit. She would have a crew that would come in and make it look as though it was something that happened that would be covered under your policy. And that was her whole business.
How do you advertise that business? Like, I'm serious. How do you do that?
I asked her that. It's all a referral-based business. This was, she said, you don't understand the area down here. It was in the Miami area. She's like, so it's just the culture of corruption here when it comes to insurance fraud. That's what we do. That's what our whole business was. And so what was interesting is not that what she did, who her clients were. Doctors, lawyers, entrepreneurs, nurses, chiropractors, people that had never had been arrested for committing crime. Okay? And so this ended up, it wasn't a massive fraud, but it was around $3 or $4 million. And so this interview, the insurance, the representative for the insurance investigative unit, he was there. So, he was mad because she was deflecting. Like she said, well, the insurance companies just deny too much. So I'm just trying to help people. Like that's how she would justify what she did. So is her slope slippery? I don't know, because her whole business model, that was her business model. And so what she said was, I would help people get their whole kitchens redone. Because if you think about it, if you need hardwood, it extends throughout the house. If you need new cabinets, she would have there was a whole team of people. There were contractors, there were appraisers, everybody was in on it, and that was the whole business model to set that up. So, hers is a cliff. So it was definitely a cliff. But the people that I've met, they change you. They really, really change you. Because when that purse came, I thought about everybody that I had interviewed. And I was like, there is no way. Get out. I don't even want you here. Like, I sent it back immediately. But to make that story, to conclude that story, I called the company. They didn't even know the purse left. They didn't know the second purse left. So when I told my friends that, what do you think they said to me?
You should have kept it.
Dumb. Kelly, dumb. That's what they said to me. And I'm like, I couldn't do that. So those are the stories and the cases in the book. I am an academic, but it is not an academic book. It's story driven. It's character driven. It's accessible. And so that's one of the things that a lot of reviews have said about it is it almost feels like someone is talking to you as opposed to someone lecturing to you. And so that was sort of the voice that I wanted to have. And it's taken a long time to sort of come out of that academic voice and really write that way because that's not how we're trained. We're not trained to speak in normal speak. But people need to hear normal speak so we can get the messages through. So that's a little bit about All the Queen's, Fool Me Once. A little bit about All the Queen's Horses. You can go watch that. So here's your homework assignment. You can watch the movie, then read the book. Okay, it won't take you long. It'll take a couple days. Or you can listen to it. You get the audiobook. It's not my voice, but just pretend that it's me. So, So any questions? We have a little time for questions. Yeah.
One question. I know we focus a lot on perpetrators, but what about the people, that are gullible or fear? I think there's this psychological term called the power of fear. And how that can really just overwhelm someone so much that they just even if they think they should report it, they don't.
So are you talking about the victims or are we talking about the whistleblowers?
Whistleblowers, I guess. Or someone who, a coworker who doesn't want to believe that's could this really be real? Is that?
So I lost your question. I'm sorry.
No, can you talk more about, I guess, the psychological profile of people who think this really can't be it, but deep down they sort of know, and what sort of stops them from reporting?
There's I think someone told me this day in the session we did on page 121. You're asking the exact question on page 121. And it's about this concept of information redundancy. And the more people that know something, the less likely someone's going to say something about it. So if we all know that everybody is in here, let's say we're taking a test and everyone's cheating, and everybody knows everyone's cheating, the less likely there is that someone's going to tell and report it. So that could be speaking a little bit to what you're talking about. But we can talk ourselves out of so much. And I think that even with Kathy Swanson, when she found out that Rita was stealing that money, Kathy said that she saw these withdrawals on her birthday, on Kathy's birthday. So that's how she remembered the date. And she said it was $250,000, $200,000, and $300,000. And I asked Kathy, when you saw that, what did you think? She's like, oh, well, I would have never thought she was stealing money from the town. I just thought she would set up some business to evade taxes. And I said, that's wrong too. She's like, but I didn't think that was as bad, but taking money from the town was. So I think that there's this idea that we don't trust ourselves, especially when it comes to anything related to money. Most people don't like accounting. You're laughing again. And so, but what that does is it makes the Rita Crunwells of the world extremely powerful. And so it's no surprise that a lot of the fraud research and embezzlements, Ponzi schemes, those are financial statement frauds happen in the accounting and finance groups because everyone leaves us alone. Everyone leaves us alone because no one wants to learn the accounting equation. No one wants to learn about why somebody would want to increase revenue or decrease expenses. No one really wants to learn that, and you just empower the Ritas of the world. That's why everybody needs to take your accounting class again, because it's important. And so she just became stronger and stronger and stronger. She was the smartest person in the room, and so you're able to just say, of course he knows more than I do, so I'm probably wrong. And you don't want to be wrong. Who wants to be wrong? We're so scared to be wrong. So I think we can just quiet that voice in a lot of cases when we shouldn't. Okay. Long answer.
Maybe an observation, and I have a feeling, and this is going to be really hard for me to articulate, but I feel like we've got a mismatch of incentives because naturally, if I'm in a company and I want a controller, I want somebody who is going to do the right thing, right? Somebody who is righteous and knows the rules. Yet, for somebody who's righteous and knows the rules, it seems to me as if those people are the last types of people that would assume other people are going to do bad things because they believe people are going to do the right thing like they will. And so with that being said, don't you almost want a perpetrator type of person in a controlling position because they kind of know what can happen and what can't? It's confusing. That's what I know I'm having a tough time articulating it, but it seems to me as if
you got to be a rogue to catch a rogue, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like intuitively you're making a decision as if you think you're making the right choice, and yet you almost want the opposite of what you think is right in order to be effective.
So someone said something. You said something?
No, I was just saying, I understand that. I get what he's saying because I've seen a lot of fraud too. I work for a financial institution, and I'm always like, how did they think of that? Like, I mean, so I feel like
because it wouldn't occur to me.
Yeah.
Well, it's one of the reasons why I think you see not a lot, but some of the perpetrators get hired to do training and do
It's like the
courses.
movie Catch Me If You Can.
There's a guy in the book, Brett Johnson, and he's in the organizational target chapter. And Brett is known as the godfather of the internet fraud. He when he came to class, he showed my students how to get on the dark web, and he showed where all of our information was, my driver's license, my social security number. I'm like, oh my God, it was for sale for $2.99. And so he trains people. He goes into banks. He shows them how you can get into your system. So I guess to your point, yes, there is another career for some. But then on the flip side, you have people like white hat hackers. And so it's a friend of mine, her name is Rachel Toback. She's lives on the West Coast. And she can show you and train you how to hack into any system, any banking system, a voting machine. Like, she can do all of that. And so she trains people. She's like the good type of hacker. So there is some merit to, I think, what you're saying.
It's similar to like the FBI profiler that hires a criminal to help them, right? So they can think that way.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you one thing. I was a business owner, and I knew a lot of business owners. A lot of the stories you were talking about were business owners or small towns. The value of learning for me, internal controls, before I started my business, just the simple thing of separating who pays the bills and who enters the bills, who writes the checks, those kinds of things. Those simple things were, there, as a matter of fact, as I started the business, the organizational structure revolved around that. Different roles, forcing people to have a conspiracy to make these decisions, which is much harder to get in that role. Was the Rita, so I'm plugging my business school training for that. And I swear to God, that was a really important thing for me. Second question, this is my question. Was the Rita Cromwell, an internal control failure, an auditing failure? What was it?
All of the above. Yeah. It was definitely internal control failure, lack of segregation of duties. There was, the auditors failed. They missed a lot. And so I'm an accountant. I'm never supposed to say that, so doesn't leave this room because I think auditors are great. But they failed on this. They trusted her too much. They relied on her too much. There were cozy relationships, we'll just call it that. Cozy relationships. And so that impacted their judgment. So I think that there was all of those things. Rita's fraud should have been discovered easily. But it wasn't. I mean, when you think about just why auditors often get sued or why an auditing firm often gets sued when fraud happens, the accounting equation balances.
Right.
Assets have to equal liabilities plus stockholders' equity. So if you take some cash, or if you take cash away, you have to make that equation balance. So where was it? What did you lie about? What account didn't make sense? And how did you miss it? Was it a materiality issue? Like, you know, that's why auditors often get blamed because there's a lot of lies in the financial statements to make fraud work. And so why do you keep missing all of that? So maybe we won't have that when the bots take over. So, but you know, like, why does it keep happening? They're kind of.
Do the hotlines that a lot of places have, do they have an impact? Do you know anything about how effective those are in getting more reports? Or?
Yeah, there's funny you asked that. So towards, I just sort of skipped around in the presentation, but in this, there was a study that HBR did that talked about whistleblowers are a sign of a healthy company. And they talk about, this next one talks about hotlines and shows that there's less lawsuits companies face, the less money firms pay out in settlements. So they do help. And I do think that they help with the culture too, because people need to be heard. You know, you have to listen when someone has an issue. It's almost like when you have a cheating issue in class. You can't just let it slide. You have to go through the whole process. Because if that one student finds out that they told you did nothing, you're done. I mean, your credibility is done. So sort of the same thing, I think, with hotlines. They are signs of help in a healthy organization.
And there's also the corporate leniency program, right? So when you are part of a fraud scheme, if you blow the whistle first, you get a reduced sentence.
A lot of times.
The DOJ has set that rule.
Yeah, there's, I don't think I talked in the book about health. I think I talked about Health South, but there were 5 CFOs that were involved in this massive fraud that happened at a company called Health South. And Aaron Beam was the first CFO to turn himself in, and he got the lesser sentence. Yeah. He was the first to tell. So.
Okay, so we can continue this conversation upstairs.
Yep.
There will be also a signing after you can get the book upstairs as well at the reception, at the terrace. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you all.